Kristo.
Don't underestimate
the power
of a single
Conversation.
it could change your whole life.
INCRadio Chatline.
conversations that matter.
This is what I ask. Let me always dwell in the temple of the Lord till I bring my
Not Troy, Michigan. I'm here in Farmington Hills, Michigan today. Excited for our topic, excited to be here with you and all of those who will be tuning in with us there in the live chat on YouTube. Please continue to like and subscribe to INC Radio if you haven't done so already. Excited to be here on Chatline where we have conversations that matter.
Yes. I hope today's conversation does matter. I mean, it matters to me. I hope it matters to you as well. So we are going to be talking about. I don't know. Oh wait, it's not on the title, And so our topic today is about contradiction. So between words and actions, there can be contradictions. So that's what we're going to be talking about today. So first off, I want to get your thoughts on this song. What do you classify as? That sounds so professional. What do you classify as like hypocritical? Like when someone says hypocritical, like that's kind of hypocritical. Like what's your sort of like your basis for it?
I guess the way that I've always thought about it in my head is you say you're gonna do one thing, but then you don't actually do the thing. Or it's like kind of like false appearance, or like you're uh, there's a word that I can't think of, but like you portray yourself to be one way, but that's not actually, how you act, or that's not actually how you behave. So it doesn't like with the title, right? With the thumbnail, between words and actions, it's like your words don't match up with your actions. Yeah, in that way.
Like saying, "Oh, I that kind of person I am. I don't cry a lot," and then like you cry at the minor inconvenience. Like that's an example I think of like like a contradiction.
Well, and in that way, I see it more as a contradiction, like as opposed to just being like a hypocrite, because maybe like people don't want to be known as someone who's a crier. The way that I kind of see as a hypocrite, like so, like I said, say it's someone who's like, oh, I'm always very studious. I'm always I'm very diligent in my studies, and then that's like you don't see that actually.
Like,
They're not that way.
C's and D's across the board.
Kind of. That's just the way I see it. Like it's more. I guess in the way that I see it, it's more of like you claim these things about yourself, right? Like you claim to be, one way, and then but that you actually don't. Um, Other ways that I kind of see it is um more on like the moral side, in terms of things, and all of us are human, right? Like we make mistakes. It's not kind of like a what's the word for it, like we're not impervious to making mistakes, or falling short of those different things. But I think it's thinking in long term, right? You kind of you make the behavior and the not matching more permanent, if that makes sense. Like you're not really self-aware, because I feel like the biggest thing to combat like hypocrisy or contradicting your own actions is really self-awareness. Because if you aren't like self-aware about the things that you're doing, then you'll be prone to making, hypocritical type of behavior, if that makes sense.
I want to follow up on that, but I'm gonna do that a little bit later. Like in terms of like the self awareness. Actually, oh no, wait. Actually, let me ask you there. Let me ask you that now. Like, do you make that distinction? Like when just in terms of like self awareness. Like, say someone's aware that they're contradicting themselves versus someone who's you can tell they're not aware, that they're contradicting themselves. Like they're not aware until you point it out to them.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you make a distinction of that, or is it just like, oh, just being hypocritical is just being hypocritical, or is there like, for you, is there like a difference between the two?
Well, because wording it in that way makes it seem more either or. But I feel like it's kind of more of a spectrum, or it's like a range, right?
Mm.
Because like I said, all of us are prone to making mistakes. All of us are prone to messing up or not following through with our word. I feel like that's also another way to kind of relate to that idea of contradiction. But
Mm.
in terms of unintentional versus intentional, I feel like it's much worse if you're on the end of you're intentionally doing it. Like you already know that it's not matching up, but you're still doing it. That's kind of that's more on the extreme side because you're already aware, but you're still continuing like with that behavior. And it's there's always different factors, I think, for that. Everybody has maybe their own reasons for why that ends up being that way, like
It's one of
different
the things I definitely heard. Like, even though they were self-aware, it's like, like I try to be, I try to be,
Mhm.
uh, I try to be like, not better. I try to be more. They say that they try to remind themselves, but sometimes they forget at the moment that they're
Yeah.
contradicting themselves already. You know?
I feel like another word that does come to mind is kind of like insincere.
Mhm.
Um, because in terms of like when you're talking about, what with our because it's more on like the moral side, I feel like, in terms of like hypocrisy as opposed to the example that you gave earlier where like they're just denying that they're a crier. I wouldn't I wouldn't call that to be a hypocrite. It's more of like in terms of values, right? It's more in
Mm.
terms of values. Like you say that those are things that or you pretend that that's your persona, but that's not actually like what you carry through.
Mm.
But the other side to that also is people who acknowledge their mistakes or people who own up to things that they do wrong. To me, that's like an expression of sincerity that can kind of also combat that hypocrisy because people change when they're brought to that awareness, right?
Mm.
They can be like, oh yeah, I didn't even realize that that's what I was doing, and then they can make the moves to change it. And it's not always right away, right? It's not always something that happens right away. It can be something gradual because maybe it's a habit that they have to unlearn or it's a practice that they have to unlearn and eventually they get there. But the fact that they're even taking the steps to get there is already to me a sign of sincerity, even if they haven't perfected it yet. Whereas and I think that goes back to what you were asking earlier about intention versus unintentional,
Yeah.
because if you already are aware that you're doing it and then you still continue on doing it knowing that it doesn't align with what you're trying to be, right?
Mm.
Then that's when it becomes even worse, as opposed to not being aware of it or not realizing the effect of what you're doing, if that makes sense. Because I've experienced that like in my own life, just growing up and realizing things about yourself, like, oh yeah, I used to advise my friends about that all the time, but but I don't even I haven't been doing that. And then you catch yourself, right? It is important for us to catch ourselves. Or maybe it even takes a wake up call, like throw back to our topic last week.
Mhm.
Sometimes you need that kind of moment to kind of wake you up and be like, oh, I didn't realize that that's what I was doing. And then you make the shifts. And then to me, that shows that expression of sincerity. Sometimes it has to be a fight to be able to not a physical fight, but like a fight, like an internal fight, to be
Internal.
able to separate from that, if that makes sense.
This, like, I'm just gonna say, like, for me, I did know, like, for me, it was cutting corners, like, in terms of like this is the task that was given to me. Like, I definitely cut corners when no one was looking. Where it's like when no one's like observing me doing the work, like I definitely find ways to make it like easier for me, even if it affects like even if it affects like the quality. As long, for me, it's the principle I held back then was like, as long as as long as it's not too noticeable, I can cut corners. Like
Yeah.
that was that. But I always said that like I was oh, I'm a fast worker. I can do I can do this task like really good. Like that's why I said, and I apologize to my parents who thought that I was really good at what I do, but it was like you know like for me it was just it was so easy to tell myself that you know what, you can cut corners, no one's looking. Like it was so easy to tell myself that like no one's observing me right now, no one's watching me work. I can I can just find a way to make this easier for myself. Like I don't even need to do a double checking, triple checking. You know what, if they notice a mistake, just apologize, correct it later. Then like that was sort of like the mindset that I have. And I did have like one of those like wake up calls, like again, throwback from last week, where where like I was presenting something that I made with sort of like that mindset of like I can just cut corners, like and like it was I forget what it was, but it was like a glaring. I forgot what the topic was about, but it was a presentation, and there was like a very glaring mistake that I made, like on the topic. Like I changed the guide that I was using, but I forgot to change the presentation because like I was focused on something else, and that was like sort of like my wake up call to like, oh, like it's not it's doesn't mean that just because no one's watching your work like you can cut corners. Right, like it goes back to like that holding your kind of holding yourself accountable for like even when no one's there to like watch you like do the work, right? Or like even if there's no one there to watch you contradict your own actions, just to go back to our topic, even when there's no one to see you contradict like your own actions, like I said, like, you hold yourself accountable to that as well, right?
Yeah. I'm glad that you brought that up, EJ, because it reminds me of that it kind of ties to that idea of where it can kind of come from. Like like why would someone want to be hypocritical, right? It's kind of like
Mm-hmm.
why would they want to do that? Well, the way that I think about it is like being concerned about how other people perceive, you know, you, and not just you, but even like your shortcomings or
Mm-hmm.
even the places that you fall short. Because this instance happened to me recently where it was like there is a sometime last week I got really upset about
Mm-hmm.
something, and I was like I was angry, and it showed in my actions that I was in the thing that I was doing, and I was surrounded with other people who was doing the same thing as me, and I'm pretty sure that it was obvious that I was angry. And then
Mm-hmm.
after that instance I felt bad because in my mind I what I've always wanted to be is someone who isn't controlled by their actions in that way. Like who
Mm-hmm.
isn't controlled by their emotions.
Mm-hmm.
And after that instance happened, I pulled these people aside and I apologized and I told them that I didn't want them to think that that was okay with me. And I admitted that what I did was wrong, right? Because you know when we think about hypocrisy, the way that I kind of see it is like you don't want to look like you're wrong or you don't want to look like you're kind of preserving like some kind of perfection
Mm-hmm.
about yourself, or not being able to admit like mistakes or not being able to admit those things. And what you said, accountable, right? um Another good thing that can kind of help with that in terms of you know combating that behavior or that kind of thing. So that's something that happened to me recently because when your emotions get to you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes if you're not careful or if you're lacking that self-awareness, you can be led to doing things that maybe you wouldn't normally do if you were thinking properly or if you didn't have those emotions. But it's important to have that kind of self-control or like that discipline, and even acknowledging that after the fact, like, yeah, that wasn't okay. Like that wasn't okay that it went that way. Because not just for you know being able to say that you are that person, but just for the example too that you set for others.
Mhm.
Because if you do something that's hypocritical, where you say that you do one thing and then you're not doing the thing, and then you have others in your life maybe that are younger than you that can be influenced by the things that you do, then they also will start to think, well, because so and so did it, maybe that's okay. And that's another thing too, that to not justify our actions, because
Mm.
somebody else, also did it. I think that that's something that kind of falls into this territory a little bit. It's like, well, so and so is doing it, right? I used to use that excuse all the time. I'm just like, well, so and so is doing it, I can do it too.
How
Oh,
come
no,
they get to do it? Right?
if it's not right, right? If it's something that that's not right, you shouldn't be like, don't follow it, because then you're just, yeah, you fall into that trap of like group
Making an
mentality, or
excuse.
like group think.
Oh yeah, yeah. Or and like excusing something that you know is wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like you know it yourself. Like you feel every time you do it, you feel guilty. Like for me, I would say every time I cut corners, I felt guilty. But then I just excused it to like they didn't notice it. Like they didn't notice it. You know what? I'm busy with a lot of other stuff. Like I can afford cutting corners like this time. Like there's a lot of like different excuses you come up with to like what you said to preserve sort of like that thought of like perfection in your mind.
Yeah, your persona, the way that you look like towards others.
Yeah,
Yeah.
like for like what you said, yeah, like for me it was sort of like wanting to wanting to preserve that. That's why I made those excuses, even though like for me I was aware that like I'm contradicting myself in saying that I'm saying that I'm a really good worker. I pay attention to detail when in reality I wasn't paying attention to detail. What was the excuse I used? I think I think it was I paid as much attention as I could at the time. That was the excuse I used to like. I used not to convince anyone, but to convince myself. To convince myself that it was enough. It's like I paid as much attention as I could afford at the time. Was the excuse? But at the end of the day, at the end of the day, like once you have that moment to think of like like I don't know if you have like those moments of like just to sit and think, like reflect. Just you take the moment to reflect, maybe on the past day and past week, depending on how frequently you do that. Like it, like when it goes to that, like it always snags at something because you do know that you're making excuses. That's the thing with contradictions. You do know you're making contradictions and self awareness is that you do know that you're contradicting yourself. Like at the time you make excuses, at the time you make excuses for yourself to not feel guilty. But when you really take that time to sit and to reflect, that's when it comes back to you that yeah, like yeah, even like even when I was excusing it, that was still contradiction to what I'd say about myself. Because I'm not holding myself accountable right now. Like like I'm like I made excuses just so I don't feel guilty at the time. But now I do feel guilty because I'm aware I'm aware that what I did was wrong, and I'm aware that I excused what I did. I excused what I did uh, with by saying that it was the best that I could afford at the time, right?
And it's kind of a hard pill to also swallow in that way. Like, because you kind of have to face yourself a bit. Like you face yourself when you realize that you are being hypocritical, and even that word, even just hearing it is kind of tough, right, Arnie? It's kind of a tough word to kind of have in your mouth. Like, oh, I was kind of a hypocrite there.
Yeah, that's so true. And you know what? I'm a hypocrite, I must admit. You know,
Thanks for joining us.
sometimes I tell my nephews, "Hey, don't do this," right? And then they look at me and I'm like, "No, seriously, don't do it."
It's something I've heard, like it reminded me of like something I've heard from like a show. Is like, do not do this thing that I love. You know, That's like it's like a quote from like a show. Oh no, wait, what was it? That wasn't the right quote. It's like, do not do this awesome thing that I love doing. It's like they know it's wrong. They're aware that it's wrong, but they're telling someone else to not do it. But then their actions is like contradicting what they're saying.
It's funny because even like here at work, when I teach my classes, we tell them, hey, don't run when you're pushing somebody in a wheelchair, right? And then they see me laughing, and I'm like, okay, yes, we're not supposed to run, but if a person's missing their flight, then yes, I will run with them because I want them to make their flight. So
It's situational.
I think it is. I think it is. I think the one that's really bad is when what you're telling them, what to do or not to do, and you do it, is when it's something that's not acceptable. You know what I'm saying? Like if you're gonna say, "Oh, don't say bad words," then really you shouldn't be saying bad words either because that's something bad. But I think it's
Hmm.
if it's one of those, oh, like, don't eat after 6 p.m. And then you still eat after 6 p.m. That's not that bad. Do you know what I'm saying? So I
Yeah.
think it just depends on the gravity of it. I think that makes a difference.
Like just in terms of like saying like bad words, that reminds you of like like you and this is something someone told me before, so I'm not gonna take credit for it. It's like even if like you're by yourself, like you should still hold yourself like accountable to, or responsible was the word they use, to not use bad words, even if you're or curse words, not to use curse words, even if you're just by yourself, because it builds the habit that might slip out one day, right? Like for you, it's like, oh, I can say curse words. Nobody's around to hear me, or nobody I know is around to hear me. I can say curse words. So, and it builds a habit that it slips out someday, right? Slips out someday in front of someone you do know, like your parents, your siblings, right? Your friends at church. Like it slips out one day, and you're like,
No, like even when I was younger, I never said any of those things. And then I have this reaction that
Mm,
every time someone says it, even though, like they're not members or anything, but they're just my coworkers or my friends. And every time they say stuff, I'm like, what did you say? I'm like, what did you say? Because, for them, like you said, that's like normal language. But
mm.
for me, that's not something I would say. And every time people would say stuff, I'm like, Hold on, what was that? What was that?" And then of course they'd apologize, and I'm like, no, my ears can't hear those kind of things.
That's like a very like kind way to go about it too. I like that, Arnie. It's a very kind way to go about it.
Yeah, so
So, since we're on the track anyway, like I want to ask you guys then, how do you make yourself like more aware, or like when you like let's say you make this contradiction now, like how do you make yourself more aware to avoid it like somewhere down the line.
like for me, I think sometimes when we tell people like either to do something or don't do it, and then you don't catch yourself. So I think when people point it out to me, like, yeah, you just told the kids, don't eat in bed, and you're here eating in bed. you know, then they point it out. And then I think that helps me become more aware. But like I said, it just depends on what it is. If it's something like, okay, don't bring water into the room because if you spill and all that stuff. Because I remember when we were kids, our parents always told us, no eating in the room and all that stuff. And that's what I lived by. And I would tell my nephews that. But then now, as I get older, I'm like, I need to have water by my bed. It's not optional, So
Mm,
then I think it just depends on what it is. If it's something, for me, I'm an adult, I don't spill things anymore. And yes, for the children, maybe we still have to be careful. And that's why we say, hey, don't bring drinks in your room. So I don't think that's really being hypocritical.
mm,
Or maybe I'm justifying it that that's not hypocritical, only because, you know, I know how I am now. Maybe as a kid, yes, I shouldn't have done it because I did. I would knock things over and spill things and all that. But I think as an adult, I'm more aware of my surroundings. So that's something I could get away with. But I will still tell my nephews, no food or drinks in the rooms.
It's that, like you said, it's situational. It's sort of like situation, and also like how or not, importance is not the word, like the severity of like that the action that they're looking at. Because like just bringing water, it's like it's just a precaution not to spill water on the floor, or if if they have electronics around, like spilling water on their electronics, because that's going to be expensive to replace. So I don't understand parents saying,
Uh,
you don't.
no, if they spill their own liquids on their own electronics, it's not getting replaced. That's their responsibility. See, but that's the problem though. Sometimes is people just start replacing it, so the kids aren't going to care about their things, right? But if you say, "Oh, sorry, you damaged it,"
Yeah.
we're not replacing it.
Gotta save up.
Yep, that's what your
Like my
allowance is
parents
for.
said this. I remember one time this happened like when we were kids, and my brother was my brother was running with like a glass of like water on his head, and we were cooling the computer. So the we removed one of like the side panels. I think you can see where this is going. We removed one of the side panels because we were cooling it. He was running with the water, and he tripped, and like everything like every drop of water that was on that glass just spilled into the inside of like the computer, and it like we just saw the screen go dark.
Oh,
And
And how long ago was this?
this is back like in
Oh, okay, when you were kids, not
starting,
now.
yeah, starting like I was just starting elementary school. So this is like way back. Like maybe like third grade, maybe I was in third grade,
Okay.
fourth grade, around that time when he like, and my parents did not replace that computer for a long time. The only reason they replaced it was out of like necessity, because we needed another one.
See.
So that was the only time they replaced it. So they really taught us that value of valuing your things. That's what they taught us too. With like when they gave me my first phone, it's like like that's the only phone you're gonna have for a long time. Take care of it. And the only time they kept their word on that, where like the only time they really replaced my phone was when it broke. Like it wouldn't open anymore. I think the battery broke or something. Like that's the only time they really replaced like my phone.
And
Like
that's responsible parenting. See, your parents are doing a great job.
yeah, so they
May-
woo.
they
Maybe
held
for
us
you it
accountable.
maybe for you it wasn't great, but good job on your
Mhm.
parents.
Yeah, it's growing up. It wasn't the best like experience for a kid, but like when like now that I'm older, like I understand. Like, thank you. I understand that the importance of doing that. Like now it's like like thank you for teaching me that. Like it definitely uh I definitely care about like my stuff more now. Like I'm careful. I don't just leave them anywhere. I don't like I have water, but I always like every time I have water next to me, like next to my computer, it has to be one with like a really tight like cap. Like even if it falls over, it doesn't spill. Like I need to have one of those, or otherwise I'm not gonna have it like near my setup, my setup here. But uh, yeah, like for my parents, they held me accountable. It's like for me, it was just more holding myself accountable when they're not watching. Like for me, that was like what I had to learn to be aware of. Like, and it's not just holding myself accountable later, because that's what I used to do. I made excuses now, and then I held myself accountable later, like what I talked about earlier, where like I only held myself accountable when I'm doing my reflection, not when I'm like at the moment, like at the moment I'm cutting corners and making excuses for myself. Like it's like that was the hard part, like going from like like yes, you do feel bad for doing that. Like congratulations, congratulations, you're aware. Now what do you do? you know. So yeah, that's, like, for me it was that. I don't want to take it too much of that, Tony. Like for
No,
you.
I was just trying to think because you're asking for ways, right, of how to
Mhm.
be more aware, right?
Yeah.
What I will say is that um we it's not good for us to put our or to be too, I guess, too caught up in what other people think of us, but in the people that it matters, like with my mom, like her opinion of me in terms of like how I am as a daughter, like that is valuable to me. So when I hear her talk about me to other people and she says all these good things, I'm like, oh man, I need to live up to to all the things that she's telling these people. I was like, I don't know if she's being too nice or if she's just, it's my mom always has good stuff to say about me, but she also corrects me in private,
Mm.
and that's what I appreciate a lot about not just my parents but even close friends, loved ones. Like they will talk good about you in like publicly to other people, but they'll correct you privately. That's some of the best relationships that I have, that they will like call you out, they will let you know like, hey, that thing that you did, you do you want to talk about that, or like, like not even necessarily being um aggressive in that way, but just kind of, just gentle like pokes, I guess you could say. So the kind of people that you have around you, that matters in terms of being able to keep yourself in check in that way. That self-awareness can be contagious. So, whoever it is that you have in your life, that makes a big impact in whether or not you can see yourself properly, because in the moments that maybe you're being too hard on yourself for the things that you didn't live up to, they can also remind you of the good things that you've done as well. Because like to Arnie's point, right, like in terms of being a hypocrite, it's not like it's not the stuff where you say you're going to go to the gym but then you don't go to the gym, or you say you're going to lose it but you don't do it. No, it's more of like the stuff that we take on as our character, right? Like who we are as an individual, who we are as a person, trying to claim to be you're this type of person, that you value these type of things, but then in practice it's kind of lacking, right? But like what we said at the start of the broadcast, we're all prone to mistakes. We have our limitations sometimes, but there's always room for improvement. I think a lot of what this stuff that can combat hypocrisy in that way, or contradicting ourselves, is just learning, like learning more about ourselves, learning about why we do the things that we do. And I try. I always like to say I try, because I don't always hit the mark, right? I
Mm.
don't want to say it's an always thing. It's a constant like trial and error, and you have to kind of be okay with that trial and error, because if not, you will always feel stuck. You always feel stuck, like you're not hitting the things. But the tiny steps that you can get towards whatever you're reaching, it's like, that's already progress against the hypocrisy, I guess, if you want to say it in that way. It's such a
The
heavy word.
contradiction. Yeah, I know. I know. Saying like I feel like every time we say hypocrisy, like there's like sort of like a drop, like
Yeah, it's like
a hard
it,
word to
it
say.
feels heavy. It feels heavy in that way, and maybe it's because it's uncomfortable, right? It's
Mhm.
it's a very vulnerable thing to be able to say that. Oh yeah, like Arnie is just great. She's like, oh yeah, I'm a hypocrite sometimes.
It says this how
She's
it
just
is.
like flat out. But it's what you do after that. I think that's also part of it too. That even with this talk today, it's bringing that self-awareness, right, to things that we might be lacking in, or things that we may not be doing, that we could still change, because as long as we're still alive, as long as we still have the time, right, there's always opportunity to still change. It doesn't have to be a permanent thing, like, oh, that's the end of it, like, period, like that's who you are. No, it can still change, right? There's always room for us to change. There's always space for us to change if we allow it to happen.
Yeah. And and sometimes, like I said, it depends on the severity of it. If it's something
Hmm.
that's not so negative, then for me, I think like, oh yeah, sure, it's okay. But then if it is, it's something bad, like the whole working out thing.
Yeah.
Yes, I'm going to work out and I don't. I think, yes, maybe that's something we need to change because that's good for your health and everything like that. But when it's something like, hey, don't eat in your room, that's not so grave. You know what I mean? So
Mm-hmm.
and that's the thing. And I think when people start pointing it out, that does, it gives you the opportunity to make changes, and then also hopefully learn from your mistakes or learn from what people are telling you, because like they said, a wise person always learns from other people's mistakes, and so you don't have to make that mistake.
It's the first time I've heard that saying.
Yeah,
But
they said like, smart people, they learn from their mistakes, right? But they said a wise person learns from other people's mistakes, which is true, because then, they see what's going on, then they don't have to make those mistakes to learn from them. They already see what other people, the mistakes that they made, so then hey, they learn from it.
yeah, that makes me think of like like learning the easy way. 'Cause they said that you could learn the easy way, you could learn like the hard way, which is like like you experience it yourself, and then you're like, oh, okay, that's how that feels. That feels bad. I'm not gonna do that again. Like that's learning the hard way. Learning the easy way is just like, ah, that's that looks painful. I'm not gonna try that. Sorry, Danny, I saw you like reach for your mic. Was there something you wanted? Oh no, you were just adjusting. You're just adjusting your mic. Never mind. But can can want to go back to like what Tony mentioned. It's like for it just reminded me of like this this one thing, like it's and just to share like for me it's like it was definitely hard to like just on the severity of like the word hypocrite, like it was definitely hard to call myself that, because like what you said, that air of like trying to maintain an air of like perfection, especially in front of people, it was hard to admit to, like, yeah, I cut corners. Yeah. It was hard to admit that, yeah, like, yeah, it's not the best quality of work that I can produce. I can produce better. I just didn't, I just didn't want to. Like I can produce a better edit. It was a better edit. I just didn't want to because I didn't want to put too much effort into it. Like that's like it was hard to admit that to people, but I realized it was hard to admit it to myself as well. Like, even when no one's like watching, it was hard to admit to myself that like you know what you're cutting corners. Like like you know what you're cutting corners, and worse off, you're making excuses. You're making excuses for yourself. That was like this in terms of like calling myself hypocritical on that. It was hard. It was hard to acknowledge it. And I feel like even now, like even now, I would say there's like I still have some contradictions, but like Tony said, like it's a work in progress, right? You have to view it as that, because for me, I felt stuck for a long while because it was like I kept going back to, well, I said, I'm sad. I said I'm this now, I'm different. I'm gonna make these changes, but I still don't do it. I still cut corners. I still make excuses for myself. Like, and like I think I've actually told Tony this, like in conversation, is like I feel like I can't change. Like I think I've said that before. Because
I think sometimes it's situational, and I think it's you knowing yourself. Like for me, when it comes to school, I always tell my nephews, get your work done as soon as possible, do your best and all that, so that you get a good grade. And but for me, I'm a procrastinator, and I do better when I procrastinate. So, they told me, "Oh, here, you have 2 weeks to do this assignment." And I would always do it the night before, but I would get an A. And so I just kept doing it. And then there was one time where they gave us the assignment, it was due in 2 weeks, and I did it ahead of time, and my grade was not that great. And so for me, no, for me, I know that I can procrastinate and still do a good job. But depending on who you're advising, sometimes you're going to have to do that. Nope, you got to start on that project now, because maybe they don't work well under pressure. And so even though that's hypocritical, of me to say, hey, do your work ahead of time. When I procrastinate, it's knowing who your audience is and it's knowing who you are. So with my nephews, I know that there's no way they can get it done last minute. So I will always tell them do it ahead of time. But for me, you can give me an assignment and say it's done in 2 weeks and I'll do it the night before and I will get it done. So like you said, it's situational, and it doesn't necessarily mean we're, that being that hypocritical is really bad, because it's the situation.
I guess for me, it's like I know it's bad, and I know how, like, this or that, like that. What I think of that is like it's not negatively affecting, like the other way. Actually, it's positively affecting you. That like working, like for you working last minute, like it works. It works and improving like your grade. It's not the best practice, but it's not the best practice. But for you, that's what works. Because you tried it the other way and it didn't end up, it didn't end up too good. So for you, you found something that like that works for you. Like it's in terms of like that for your grade. It's just for me, I'm aware that how it's negatively affecting quality is how it's negatively affecting quality. Saying that I want to be better and then not following through with it, or following through with it for a while and then going back to old habits. Going back to that old habit of yeah, I'm not gonna put too much effort into this. What, this is as much effort as I can afford this time around. It's like it's going back to that and then feeling guilty about it like later on. And I've told myself that, I told myself that just feel guilty about it later on. Just just get the work done. Just get the work done now. Feel guilty about it later. And later on, it's just like I do feel guilty, and I feel guilty that I told myself that. And I've had that conversation with a lot of people where, or not a lot, but but several people where I was like, I feel like I can't change, because I always say that, but I always come back to it. You know?
But like what you're saying too, EJ, the fact that you're even thinking or feeling that way, like the conscience, right? The conscience that's there. That's important that it's even there in the first place, because for some they may be able to do it just like, just as easily. And again, I'm talking more about the moral side. We're not talking about you know going to the gym and not going to the gym. I mean actually how you identify it, in terms of like your characters and your actual values. Because if you actually look up I'm really into words. I like words a lot, and if you look up um, the origin of like the word hypocrite, it comes from the Greek words. Is from the dictionary, one of the dictionaries. It means actor or stage player.
Mhm.
So in terms of like what we said earlier, it's a range, right? It's a spectrum. It's not just like an either or thing, because there's a lot of things that you can say, like what to Arnie's point earlier, like her nephews might be able to like, oh well auntie, you're a hypocrite because you said this or whatever. But that's in terms of like practices of knowing what your capabilities are.
Mhm.
But in terms of like, let's say I'm telling you, EJ, you should be prayerful. Like you should be prayerful, like you say your prayers, but then I'm not doing that, right? Especially as a Christian, that's something that we always want to be able to follow through with. So
Mhm.
it Arnie's right. It's situational in that way, and the when it becomes more of a serious conversation is when it's something that's like affecting your morals and your values. Because the other stuff, it's a little bit more gray in the sense that, yeah, there might be times where I didn't go to I made a promise to myself that I would go to the gym 3 times a week. I didn't go at all this week, right? It's like I missed the week, and it's like, well, things come up. Things come up,
Mhm.
and it's like as much as I wanted to, like I had to stay late at work. There are things that um in the way that she says it's situational. There are other factors that come into play, but at the end of the day, it's really going to be on you to kind of self-reflect and see the parts where it's more severe, and see the parts where you can be like, oh well, it's okay, because that's something that I can make up next time. I can make up going to the gym another week. Like I can go, but it's very different for me to kind of say that I'm one kind of person, but then people actually don't see that in me. Like I tell other people like, you know, you should be this way, but then they don't actually see that for me first, because that's also leading by example too, right? Especially in good environment in certain environments where we are leaders, where we want to be able to set a good example. There are times where we fall short, right? But it's the fact, going back to your point earlier that you mentioned, you felt that guilt. It's important that you even felt that guilt because you're recognizing what needs to be done or what needs to change. Whereas in other situations, some people won't even feel that. Some people won't even like realize that. And that's where it becomes a little bit more, like, well, maybe we need to
I think it's
step
not
back.
that they don't feel it; it's that they train themselves to ignore it, like when they feel it, right? Because
Well,
everyone,
I don't
everyone
know. It could
not,
be different for everyone. Some people might
uh,
not feel it at all, and some people might feel it, but like what you said, they're ignoring it because it's gonna
I
be
feel like
between
everyone has a level of conscience, right?
awareness.
Their awareness to it. Like where by themselves they might not, or by themselves they might excuse it. That's why like I want to ask you guys, like, do you find it like important to like point it out, like when you notice it in someone? Because and not Tony, you mentioned it earlier, like there are some people who point it out to you, but not publicly, of course. You know?
It depends what it is. Like again, going back to Arnie's point, for me, it's like a range of things, right? Like my friends will call me out if I'm not keeping my word in terms of going to the gym. Yeah, whatever. And I'll tell them like, well, these are the situations that came up in my life this week, and it's like triage. You're like, you kind of have to like priorities, right? There's certain priorities, but there are other more serious things that for me, that I value as an individual, or that I value like in my character, that I want to be seen in me. Of course, those are things that I would expect my friends or people who love me to call me out on, like in terms of being a, like, let's say, being a good friend, right? Everybody has maybe different expectations in being a good friend. But if there's something that I'm lacking in, that I'm not doing for one of my friends, or I'm treating them a certain way that they don't appreciate, or that they don't like, I would hope that they would tell me so, that they would call me out on it and be like, hey, what you're doing, like, this thing is not okay, right? Like this thing that you're doing. And then I, from that moment, I can change, right? Because sometimes we need other people to kind of point those things out to us too, because we may not be aware that we're even doing it, or we come accustomed to it, or it's become such an automatic kind of response, right? Or even going back to that instance of what I mentioned earlier, I used to be like hot-headed. I used to be hot-headed when I was younger, and I would I would get angry about a lot of different things, and it had a lot to do with control, right? Like wanting to control like things, like, oh, it has to be this way, blah blah blah, like, or expecting other people to show up the way that I do, right? And that was something that was very hard to unlearn. That was something that was very hard to let go of, and it's still a practice to let go of, right? But the fact that it was even pointed out to me, it had to start there in order for me to even begin changing it all. So, your question about whether we should let others know or we should call other people out, to me, that's a sign of love for someone. But the way that you do it matters too. Like, you don't want to do it in a public in a public forum in front of other people, like, hey, you said you're this kind of person, and blah blah blah, like, whatever whatever. And it's like, well, it's good that you're letting them know, but is it the best way to do it in that kind of open, like, in front of
In front of
everyone?
other people,
Yeah, it just depends, and that's why I'm in the camp of, I'm not afraid to tell my friends, like, that thing that you did was not cool, but I'll do it privately because I still want to preserve, our relationship, and still protect them in that way, because then at least that they can reflect on it and then correct as needed. Whereas if you do it in a public way, and in a way that it's like in front of everybody, like, that's that's a different thing now. That's a different animal that you're kind of dealing with because you're correcting them, but now it's
You're
in a way
also
that
sort of like, embarrassing them.
But
yeah.
even if you do it in private, it's also how you deliver the message.
Hmm.
Because and I think when you know your friends or you know your family, you'll know where you could just be straight up and say stuff
Yeah,
and
true.
they'll okay, and then there's some you kind of still have to be very sensitive and say it in a very nice way or they take it the wrong way. So I think besides being in private is also how you deliver that message.
Mhm. So just in terms of that, of what you both said, like, well, there's pointing it out to others, but there's also holding ourselves accountable to it. So lastly, what should we hold ourselves accountable when we notice that what we did, what we've been doing has been hypocritical? I know it's a, I still find it a heavy word to say.
Hold on, before we go there, I just wanted to read a comment that someone made on the chat. So I hope like people who are viewing, you guys know you guys could chat with us and we'll read it. But someone had put on there that it's hard for them to imagine seeing Tony as a hothead.
Yeah, and it's honestly that's one of the things that I've really struggled with, Arnie, to be honest with you, because knowing how other people, like what I mentioned earlier about my mom, like how she talks me up to other people, it's like knowing how other people perceive you, that also like kind of holds you accountable sometimes,
Yeah,
because it's not just in terms of expectation, but like knowing that that's how they see you, like it motivates me to want to live up to that, not in the sense that I want to please these other people, but it's like I want them to know me as that kind of person. And it kind of just goes back to that idea of like hypocritical or being like an actor. Like if people are going to know me for anything, that's what I want to be known as. Now they won't know everything about you, right? Like Nathan put there, it's hard to imagine me as a hothead. It's like I have my moments because I'm also human, right? And that's something that I try to remind people, because when they give you like compliments or stuff like that, sometimes it may feel hard to accept, especially if you're critical of yourself. You're kind of like, well, they think of you that way, but I know this stuff about me, right? I know all this stuff about me that I know I need to work on. But that's just very human, and that's another way that we can kind of hold ourselves accountable. And it helps to hold ourselves accountable in that way, because then you're able to kind of, I think of it like, i I tend to say this a lot. I know I can kind of visualize who I want to be, and then I recognize where I am at, and I'm always trying to close that gap between the two, but I never do, because it's always changing, it's always evolving. And in that way, I don't know if that makes me hypocritical, because I see two different people, but that striving, and that trying, that
Mhm.
effort of trying to continuously improve and to change for the better, like accountability will help you do that. Will help
yeah,
you.
and I totally get what you're saying because when I was much younger, I used to be like that. And so it is, you have to find a way to change. And my whole thing was, like you said, I was stubborn. I needed to get things done certain ways. It had to be done this way. I was really like that and I would stress out so much. But something opened my eye where I went to the doctors and they said, you keep acting like this, your heart's going to give out one day. So you need to relax. You need to, because I guess like with my heart, there's like a little palpitations where it's not beating normally or something. And so they said, you need to learn how to just relax. Things can be done in different ways. It's not always your way. It could be done in different ways. And and don't get, like you said, don't be so hot-headed because that's stress and that's not good for you. And so every time people say like, cuz people don't know how old I am, and when I tell them how old I am, they're like, there's no way. And I'm like, yeah, cuz you know why? I don't care. I don't stress because when you stress, it will make you look older, right? Or,
Mhm.
things like that. And so, even at my age, I'm going to be happy to say I've only found one strand of white hair, and that is it. Why? because I have learned to just like, you know what, take it as it is, relax, don't stress too much because it's not worth it, you know. So
Mhm. Not stressing too much about that.
about anything.
Mm. Which is like for me, like when I've held myself accountable, I feel like I stressed myself too much on that. Or like I was talking earlier, I was like I always have these, which is I guess in a way it's good. It's like it drives me, like what Tana said, it drives me to strive to do better. But I have to take care of that part of like not making myself feel too guilty where it stops me from action, which is has it has done because I've had the moment where I was like, you know what, I probably can't ever change. I probably can't ever change because I always go back to like if I could go back, I wish I could tell myself like you know, like no, keep going. You got this. You know, like you can get better. Like you can be better than this. You know, like and that's the thing. Oh, like you can like the thing is it can always come back. But like what Tony said, like you have that awareness already. You know, like and you might not even notice it how much better you're handling it like this time around, right? But yes, I hope I do hope that today's conversation has been something that matters, like to our audience. Like I hope you've been able to share like your thoughts as well there in our live chat. To my co-panelist here in the call. Thank you for like sharing like your thoughts with me today. This has been a topic that has been on my mind for a while, and I honestly didn't know how to approach it. So I'm thankful for the both of you for coming on here for sharing like your thoughts on this topic. I felt like I definitely learned
Can I
something.
just add one more thing, EJ?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
It's not a permanent state.
Mm.
It's not a permanent state. So, you know, the best thing that you can do is be accountable and also look to people that you admire as well. We all have our own things to carry, but it helps to look to people that you admire and you respect for who they are and their example. Take the good that you see from those things and just keep trying.
Let's keep trying. Well, thank you again. Thank you to everyone for joining me in this conversation today. If you're watching this in replay, hello future viewer, like if you guys have any topics that you or any conversations that you want us to tackle here on Chatline, no, don't be afraid to send a message to us. Like if you know us personally, yes, you can message us. But if not, you can just put it there in live chat in the comments what you want us to cover. The topics that you want us to cover. But again, hopefully this has been a conversation that matters to you. And until next time, we'll see you again here on INCRadio Chat Line. Bye, everyone. Have a great week.
This is what I ask. Let me always dwell in the temple of the Lord till I